Scientists studying anxiety disorders just uncovered a biochemical pattern in the brain, the first time a consistent signature has ever shown up across multiple anxiety conditions. And strangely, the same pattern seems to echo in a completely different line of research, early brain stress appearing in young adults with metabolic strain. Two newly published investigations with one major overlapping clue. I am William Wallace, and you are listening to Daily Value. Anxiety disorders are the most common mental health conditions worldwide, and nearly 30% of adults in the United States will be diagnosed with one. Yet the clinical reality is unsettling. About one third of people who need treatment never receive it. And among those who do, 35 to 60% never achieve much remission. For conditions this widespread, the underlying biology should be clearer than it is. Part of the challenge is that anxiety isn't driven by a single structure or neurotransmitter. It emerges from a distributed network: the amygdala, which detects threat, the prefrontal cortex, which evaluates and regulates responses, and neuromodulators like norepinephrine, which amplify arousal and vigilance. Each contributes to different forms of anxiety, which is why panic, generalized anxiety, social anxiety, and phobias all look so different on the surface. For decades, scientists assumed these differences reflected fundamentally different biology. Then a new investigation challenged that assumption. A first of its kind meta analysis of brain imaging studies published in September of this year pulled together data across multiple anxiety disorders. And within those data sets, researchers uncovered something that was a little bit unexpected: a consistent biochemical pattern in the cortex. A shift subtle in individual studies, but it was unmistakable when everything was aggregated. Even more puzzling was the direction of the change. This chemical signal was reduced in anxiety disorders. That's the opposite of what appears in conditions like major depression, bipolar disorder, or schizophrenia, where the same family of compounds is often elevated. Psychiatric patterns rarely reverse like this, yet here was a clear, reproducible signal. At the same time, an unrelated study examining young adults under metabolic strain reported early signs of neuronal stress. Their biochemical fingerprint, derived from blood biomarkers rather than brain scans, showed a trajectory that echoed the pattern emerging in the anxiety meta analysis. Two studies, different methods, different populations, and a strangely overlapping clue. But before we can understand what this compound is doing and why it shows up in both emotional stress and metabolic stress, we need to see how scientists even detected this pattern in the first place, because they weren't looking at emotions or behavior or subjective symptoms. They were looking directly at brain chemistry. To understand what this pattern actually represents, we have to look at the tool that revealed it. Maddock and Smuckney are two researchers who use a form of brain imaging that measures chemistry, not pictures. Instead of showing structures or activity, these scans read out the concentrations of specific molecules inside living brain tissue. One of those chemical signals reflects a family of compounds the brain relies on to build and maintain its membranes and myelin. And in earlier studies on people with panic disorder, Maddock kept seeing something odd. The signal for this compound was consistently lower. That compound was choline, or more precisely, choline containing molecules that make up the membranes and insulation of brain cells. On its own, that finding was interesting, but it wasn't definitive. A single disorder, small samples, nothing you would rewrite a textbook over. So Maddock and Smuckney did something far more ambitious. They pulled data across multiple imaging studies covering multiple anxiety disorders and analyzed them as a single data set. They expected a reduction. They did not expect the reduction to be this consistent. Across disorders and across studies, people with anxiety showed about an 8% lower choline chemical signal in cortical tissue compared with healthy controls. In the brain, 8% is not background noise. It's a shift large enough to reflect a genuine change in the biochemical environment. And the direction of the shift is what makes this kind of startling. In conditions like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or traumatic brain injury, the same signal usually moves upward, not down. Anxiety disorders reverse that pattern completely, a biochemical signature running the opposite direction of nearly every other psychiatric condition. A lower choline signal is unusual in brain disorders, so the natural question is, what's actually causing it? What does it mean? The researchers outlined three major possibilities. First, membrane and myelin turnover. Every brain cell is wrapped in a membrane, and many neurons are coated in myelin, which is basically electrical insulation. These structures are constantly being repaired, almost like a road crew repaving the same stretch of highway every night. Choline is one of the main construction materials. So if the brain suddenly needs more repair work than usual, it burns through more choline. and the available pool goes down. Second, transport into the brain. Choline has to enter the brain from the bloodstream, and that transport is a controlled process. Think of it like trucks bringing supplies into a factory. If the factory starts consuming materials faster than the trucks can deliver them, the shelves inside start looking empty, even if the trucks are running at full speed. That alone can lower the signal. Third, methylation chemistry, the brain's internal bookkeeping. Choline donates methyl groups for hundreds of reactions. You can picture these reactions like tiny toll booths. Every time a reaction runs, it charges a methyl fee. If these reactions speed up, or if the brain uses more choline derived molecules as methyl donors, the choline pool shrinks. Now, here's where this matters for anxiety. Chronic noradrenaline, the same system behind constant vigilance and the physical feeling of being on high alert, ramps up all three of these demands at the same time. It pushes support cells to grow and mature, which increases myelin production, and that takes choline. It also drives methylation reactions that use up chemical donors without replacing choline. So the fight or flight system may literally be pulling choline in multiple directions at once, and that pattern appears outside the brain too. In a separate study of young adults with obesity, lower blood choline levels were linked with higher inflammation and increased neurofilament light chain, which signals early stress on neurons. Psychological stress and metabolic stress look different, but they seem to hit the same biochemical network, and choline sits right in the middle of that pressure. In other words, this is not a random 8% dip. It looks like a chemical trace of a system that is working harder under stress. So let's bring this all home. What exactly does this mean for you right now? One of the big lessons from this research is that anxiety isn't just about circuits firing too fast or stress hormones running high. It's also about the chemical infrastructure those circuits depend on: the cell membranes, the myelin insulation, the methylation reactions, the metabolic work happening underneath the surface. Choline is involved in all of that. Here's the issue: when your fight or flight system stays switched on, which is basically the operating system of anxiety, your brain's demand for choline goes up. But most people aren't meeting the baseline need, let alone the higher demand. Recent research into the matter suggests that at least 90% of Americans don't even take in enough choline. And that matters. In one study of healthy adults, people who ate over 310 milligrams of choline per day had 26% lower inflammatory markers tied to metabolic strain. Now, 310 milligrams is not the recommended intake. It's simply the point where we start seeing measurable benefits. Note that number as an absolute minimum amount of choline that you might want to take in. The official adequate intake levels set by the National Academy of Medicine are higher. Men need about 550 milligrams per day, women about 425 milligrams per day, teen boys 550 milligrams per day, teen girls 400 to 425 milligrams per day. Pregnancy needs are a little higher, around 450 to 550 milligrams per day, with data available suggesting that even doubling that has benefits. But most people aren't even coming close to these numbers. So let's talk about how to get there safely and reliably. One large egg, the whole egg with the yolk, gives you about 150 milligrams of choline. That means 2 eggs in the morning already puts you at 300 milligrams, which is the level where we start seeing lower inflammatory markers in the research. If you eat meat or fish, a small 3-ounce serving, about the size of your palm, adds another 70 to 120 milligrams, depending on the food. Salmon lands around 80 milligrams, chicken breast is about 70 milligrams, ground beef is closer to 80 milligrams, and a lean cut of beef can get you near 120 milligrams. For plant-forward eaters, cooked broccoli or Brussels sprouts each give you about 60 milligrams per cup. Soybeans give you roughly 100 milligrams in a half cup, and lentils or beans add another 30 to 45 milligrams. Now, practically and in plain English, 2 eggs plus 1 normal serving of meat or fish will put most adults close to the recommended daily intake. And you can absolutely reach those levels with plants. You just have to be more intentional about it. Supplements do exist: alpha GPC, citicoline, phosphatidylcholine, but the research here is clear. We don't yet know if taking more choline reduces anxiety, so use food first. Here's the bigger point: supporting choline isn't just about choline, it's about supporting the systems that use it: sleep, blood sugar stability, movement, inflammation, and overall metabolic health. Anxiety isn't purely psychological, it leaves a chemical footprint, and you have real leverage over the biology that shapes it. And that's the hopeful part. You may not control every part of anxiety, but you can support the biology that makes resilience possible. Thank you for joining me today on Daily Value. Stay healthy, and I'll see you next time.